I want to begin by talking about something that I didn't anticipate revisiting because, to be honest, I find this to be a very absurd story, but it's an absurd story that has started to become a little bit more reflective of one of the more unfortunate political developments of our time. And to go back in time a week on this, the trigger was what I thought was, frankly, a petty and dumb tweet from the Conservative candidate in Portage-Lisker, Brandon Leslie, who we had on the show. We showed the graphic on a previous episode on Thursday. He basically was just sticking a little thumb into Maxime Bernier. That's a very weird visual. He was poking Maxime Bernier. That's a little bit less weird. And saying, unlike Maxime Bernier, I'm never going to go to the World Economic Forum. And then Maxime Bernier responded and said that he is a liar, Brandon Leslie. He's never attended the WEF. And for me, despite finding this to be a pretty inconsequential and stupid fight, I weighed in not because I thought that either one of them was beholden to the World Economic Forum, but because I took umbrage with Maxime Bernier's attempt at revisionism here and saying he had never attended when clearly he had. And I went through the entire argument on my show. I said, here's proof he was there. And ultimately, this came down to Maxime Bernier having a very different understanding of what the word attended means than I do. Now, my claim to Maxime and about that whole thing was never that he was a WEF shill or he was a closet globalist. I take Maxime Bernier at his word, as I take Pierre Poilievre at his word, that both of them are very critical, and I'm glad they are, of the WEF and its agenda. What I didn't like is Bernier claiming that he had never gone when clearly he had. And notwithstanding, his answer to that was that it was because he was meeting with Canada's allies and other foreign ministers for the whole Afghanistan war, which, again, is an entirely legitimate reason to be there if that's your goal, but you're still there. And that was the issue. Now, the reason I bring this up again, and I am completely convinced that this is a distraction from real issues, but it's become a very consuming distraction, is because Maxime Bernier has decided to take aim at me and at True North's coverage. He tweeted out just yesterday evening that True North and I are like CBC for daring to have this conversation about his record. And again, he was there as a conservative. He was there at Stephen Harper's behest. No one is disputing that. He was still there, and all of his issues and objections to the World Economic Forum didn't come about until much later on, just as the Conservative Party of Canada was all too willing to be a player in the WEF until it no longer became politically advantageous to do so. And the argument I've put forward about this is that the WEF of 2023 is not the same as the WEF of 2008. I think it's entirely legitimate for someone to say, listen, we thought it was one thing, we thought we were doing this, we weren't, or the organization has changed. Whatever the case is, that's not the discussion that we've had, and that's not been the argument from the PPC. But in the last several days, this segment that I did on my show that I thought was done after Maxime Bernier and I spoke about it, and I said to the audience, listen, you've heard my side, you've heard his side, make up your own mind. This has continued for basically for 4 days since then. My tweets have been nonstop. In my mentions, my Twitter mentions have been nonstop about this issue, and it's gotten very nasty. It's gotten very personal, and I don't really care about that. If people are that insecure about their own party and their own leader, which is what this comes from, that they believe they are incapable of answering a tough question, that says a lot more about your chosen party and your chosen leader than it does about anyone else. The accusations that I have gotten along this vein are that True North has sold out, that I've secretly been on the take and I've been getting money from Pierre Poilievre or Klaus Schwab or a combination of the two. I don't even know what the conspiracy theory is suggesting right now, but it's an odd thing. And I've always made a joke on this show that I often get criticized by conservative loyalists and PPC loyalists for being too sympathetic to the other. And sometimes it'll be over the same interview and the same discussion. Indeed, after I spoke to Maxime Bernier on Thursday, I had conservative loyalists saying, oh, you're a PPC sellout because you're giving him more airtime. And then I had the PPC loyalists that didn't like my line of questioning and wanted to string me up as being some, again, conservative shill. It's very difficult to keep track of this. I have always been very clear on where I stand, which is not having a particular party. I have voted PPC and I have voted conservative. And I share that with you just so you understand that I'm not one of these people that believes that truth lies exclusively with one party. I ran as a progressive conservative candidate in 2018, and I have been probably more critical of the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party than most other progressive conservatives in Ontario, because I thought it was vehemently wrong. I vehemently disagreed and thought it was incredibly wrong how Doug Ford took his majority government in 2018 and chose to use it and has continued to. So anyone who thinks it's a gotcha to point out that I was a candidate when it's not been a secret, I have like 10,000 signs with my name on it. Like, you're not really unearthing anything there. So all of this is to say that I have absolutely no regrets about the discussions and coverage that we did on this last week. I have no regrets at all about giving the PPC attention when no one in Canadian media was. And I said last election, I went on the road with Aaron O'Toole and the Conservatives. I went on the road with Maxime Bernier and the PPC. Both were figures who had a story to tell and had issues to talk about and contributed to the Canadian political discourse. And ultimately, the reason I'm talking about this now is to say that I do not care about your fragility if you are so insecure that you think Maxime Bernier looked bad on my show that you're done with True North. I do not care, because you are someone that doesn't actually want to be challenged. You are someone that doesn't want to have a real discussion or a real dialogue or a real debate. You are so insecure that if I'm agreeing with you, you think I'm good, but if I disagree with you, you think I'm bad, rather than saying, oh, I didn't like his position on that, and here's why. Or, oh, I did like his position on that, and here's why. And this is part of an increasing frustration I have with the direction of politics right now. It used to be that you may like or dislike a broadcaster or a columnist, and sometimes they'd be on point and other times they're not. But the amount of times right now that people will share a piece, not because they agree with the methodology of it, but only because they agree with the outcome. And then they will turn on the author of that piece the next time they write something that perhaps the reader disagrees with. And the battle between the Conservatives and the PPC is a vicious, nasty one. Both sides think the other are dangerous to democracy. They both think they're sellouts. They both think each other are grifters. And I've been absolutely fine to cover both and declare neutrality between the two, and I'll continue to. But when Maxime Bernier, who has never had anything unkind to say to me to my face, nor have I ever said anything unkind to him in his face. And after that interview on Thursday, we had a lovely chat off air talking about it. And he said, oh yeah, you're doing great work, and thanks for letting me come on. And then he turns around and says, we're like CBC for having it. CBC for having that interview, like CBC for having that discussion and asking him these questions when his own public statements are in contradiction with the record, which was very easy for me and for anyone else to find. I have to say, give me a break. Give me a break. And I don't actually think my integrity is imperiled there, because people can see for themselves that he is trying to rewrite history when he claims that he was never at this conference, despite being an invited guest of the World Economic Forum at that conference. And again, I do not have an issue with him being there in 2008. I have an issue with him going there and claiming he wasn't. That was what this whole thing was. And had he not made that claim, this would not be an issue. But you can tell how insecure his own supporters are about their standing. And if you look at poll numbers, not particularly surprising, given that the PPC is unlikely to achieve the electoral results it had in 2021. But they are so uneasy about their own position in the Canadian political landscape that even the most inconsequential of critiques and criticisms to them is like going nuclear. It is scorched earth to them. Unbelievable.